On July 12th, Air Canada announced that they were forming a strategic partnership with Emirates, the flag carrier of the United Arab Emirates. As part of this agreement, the two carriers intend to establish a code-share relationship later this year, which would allow Air Canada passengers to book connecting flights with Emirates on a single ticket, and vice versa. Now, this is quite an interesting move for a couple of reasons. Right now, Emirates only flies to a single Canadian destination, that obviously being Toronto, 5 times a week with their A380. Likewise, Air Canada also flies between Toronto and Dubai with 787s 3 times weekly. Now, Emirates has made it clear in years past that they'd like to expand further into Canada, including adding flights to Vancouver and even Calgary. However, flights between Canada and the UAE are restricted to a certain number per week by a bilateral agreement that was first signed in 1999. When Emirates first launched flights to Toronto in 2007, they were restricted to operating 3 flights a week into Canada alone, naturally using all of those frequencies for flights to Toronto. In the years that followed, they lobbied the Canadian government to expand that agreement to allow them to operate more flights into the country. However, that was met with opposition from both Transport Canada and Air Canada themselves. The situation came to a head in 2010 as Air Canada's CEO at the time, Calin Romanescu, quote, accused Emirates of wanting to flood Canadian skies with airline seats so they could fly passengers through Dubai instead. Doing so, he said, would be severely damaging to Canadian airlines and airports since it would take away valuable connecting traffic. A passenger flying from Canada to Southeast Asia, for example, instead of flying Air Canada to someplace in Europe and continuing on with a Star Alliance carrier, could instead fly via Dubai with Emirates, to the detriment of Air Canada's own business. Emirates firmly denied that would be the case, saying that connecting traffic on their flights was only complementing the existing demand between Canada and the UAE. Ultimately, the Canadian federal government of the time denied any additional weekly flights after years of negotiations, much to Emirates and the UAE's dismay. You can see why the two carriers might not have been on the best of terms back then. Granted, it's now been well over a decade since that took place, and with a few more weekly flights finally being granted in 2018, relations between the two countries are a bit less frosty. Even so, it does beg the question, what brought about this change of heart from Air Canada that they're now wanting to work with Emirates? Well, obviously the actual reason won't necessarily be public knowledge, but if you'll allow me some speculation, there's a quote in the press release from Michael Rousseau, Air Canada's current president and CEO. In it, he mentions that Air Canada is pursuing their strategy of expanding their global reach in response to growing opportunities in VFR, or visiting friends and relatives, markets that serve Canada's large multicultural communities. In light of certain prominent airspace closures to Canadian aircraft, a couple of Air Canada's long-haul routes have been affected, especially those between Canada and India. Normally, Air Canada flies multiple flights a week to Delhi from Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. However, the Vancouver route has been temporarily suspended because of those airspace restrictions, and the Toronto and Montreal ones have naturally had to take a slightly longer route. So, code sharing with Emirates and placing the EK code on, and there's another subtle detail here, select Air Canada flights may just be their workaround for flights to Southern Asia. Of course, that's just one of several potential reasons for this partnership, and no matter the actual reasoning, you can see how both carriers would benefit from this arrangement. As a side note, it's worth mentioning that WestJet seems to have secured slots in Dubai for this upcoming winter season. They also have a codeshare agreement of their own with Emirates, but will anything come of those slots? We'll have to wait and see, but that would be an interesting way to keep a Dreamliner busy during the winter months. One last point from the press release that's worth mentioning is that both carriers will also establish reciprocal frequent flyer benefits and reciprocal lounge access for qualifying customers, with further details announced when approvals are finalized. That would mean some very nice perks for Air Canada status holders anywhere that Emirates has a lounge, although they don't quite mention frequent flyer redemptions. Being able to use Aeroplan points on Emirates flights would really be something. So, on the surface, this announcement between Air Canada and Emirates may seem like an ordinary codeshare, but given the history between the two carriers and the current geopolitical landscape, it seems safe to say that there's more to this agreement than meets the eye. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.